Good morning, everyone. As Paul says, I'm MD of Centrica Energy Upstream, but not here today representing Centrica. I'm here today as the leader of the pilot work stream that's been working on this key infrastructure challenge. Our existing UK infrastructure is seen both by government and our industry as a critical enabler if we're going to maximise the recovery from our basin. During discussions last year with DEC and the industry, we agreed that we needed to do something about this to re-stimulate what Pilot had been focused on. And we put a small team together to develop a scope of work. What is it we need to look at if we're going to make a real difference and manage this infrastructure appropriately? As Paul says, Pilot is probably fairly well known to you, a number of you certainly in the room. But it's a joint initiative between the government, specifically DEC, and the oil and gas industry, chaired by the Secretary of State, with the aim of maximising the recovery from the basin. So clearly a lot of alignment there. In January, we launched a number of work fronts, broad cross-industry participation, as you can see on the slide here behind me. Over 20 companies involved, the university, DEC, Oil and Gas UK themselves, as well as a number of commercial enterprises that are providing their expertise to us as we look at this. And I'd like just to take the opportunity today to thank everyone that's been involved so far. People have made significant personal contributions, a lot of effort. Some of these teams are meeting every 2 weeks, so it's utilising a lot of their time, and a number of them are in the audience today. So again, just thank you very much for your support. So today is about sharing what we've been doing, sharing and discussing with you why is this important, what are the objectives and deliverables, what progress have we made so far, and what are the next steps if we're going to drive this through to a conclusion. It's a hugely important piece of work, and it's going to take the commitment and support of the industry and the government if we're going to make a real difference. There's still a substantial prize in the UK. 6 billion barrels of current production and sanctioned developments. 5 to 11 billion barrels of probable, possible and undeveloped discoveries. And 3 to 9 billion barrels of yet-to-find exploration potential. And there's universal agreement that our infrastructure is going to be critical if we're going to maximise that prize. Whether it's maintaining the integrity of our existing infrastructure, the rising cost pressures that we have if we're going to extend the asset lives of our existing infrastructure. We've got over 50 underdeveloped discoveries in our country, the majority of which too small to build their own infrastructure. They're going to rely on existing infrastructure if they're going to come to fruition. And our exploration potential, our basin is at the mature end. It's likely the majority of the discoveries that we make, again, won't be big enough to install their own infrastructure and will rely on existing infrastructure to develop them. And we have a short window of opportunity to make a real difference before production decline and rising cost pressures squeeze the profit margins of some of these key pieces of infrastructure. If you look at our oil systems, they're reliant on a small number of long-life key infrastructure systems. And if you look at gas, by 2020, 65% of our gas production will go through 5 gas systems, leaving 14 others that currently exist scrambling with the rest of the potential. And it's estimated by 2025, more than 50% of our infrastructure will potentially be decommissioned. So we need to do everything we can now if we're going to extend the life of that infrastructure. I mentioned the risk of sort of premature decommissioning, and I think these two graphs kind of bring it to a head very clear where that challenge comes from. Our basin is in decline, and if you look at last year, the decline surprised everyone, both in the industry and in the government. What was contributing to that big decline? Some extended maintenance shutdowns if you look across a number of key assets, but also a limited number of projects that came in and delayed project activity as well. And at the same time, on the right-hand side, you can see our rising operating costs. Not only rising, but continuing to exceed our expectations on the pace that they've risen. So the combination of those two factors are putting financial pressure on a lot of our key infrastructure. However, it's not all bad. If you look at the current outlook for what's planned to be developed and delivered, it's only delivering something like a little over 50% of the maximum potential out there. And we also see an industry willing to invest. We've got record capital investment ongoing at the moment, significant interest in the licence round activity. Again, if you look this year, a record level of interest. So potentially there's much more to play for. Our analysis indicates that with the current plans in place, many hubs will be decommissioned in the next 10 to 20 years. And here's an example of a sort of mid-case scenario. Our work shows if this was to happen, we'll leave a significant amount of resources in the surrounding areas of that acreage. Those volumes probably stranded forever. And you're going to hear more from that from Una shortly. So we need to act now if we're going to make a change and change the future that's shown here. Now, this is not a new issue. Improvements have been made in industry collaboration. The Infrastructure Code of Practice, the Commercial Code of Practice champions, debt guidelines, information transparency have all been worked on. However, there's a real question mark on the adequacy and effectiveness of what we've currently got in place. In particular, if you look at some of the challenges we've got in the future of our industry. And the government's recognised that as well. We saw that in the 2011 Energy Act and the introduction of more vigorous sector-state dispute resolution processes and powers. So what are some of the limitations of what we've got in place? It tends to focus on current needs and not really thinking about long-term future requirements. Transparency has improved, but not to the level that companies desire. And each negotiation is typically considered in isolation. There's no regional holistic overview of what's best for the region or indeed best for the industry. And that's the challenge we set our pilot task team to tackle. So we have some challenges. Our production is in decline. Our developments are typically smaller, relying on existing infrastructure. We do have an ageing infrastructure and a rising cost base. And we also sometimes have potential different drivers between the companies that are involved. So a risk clearly is we don't maximise the potential of our basin. And what we've set this up to do is to ensure we mitigate that risk. We organised our work groups into 3 work streams, with the steering group providing overall direction and support. And that steering group comprising the 3 work stream leads, myself as the overall leader of the work stream, DEC and Oil and Gas UK. And the 3 work streams are focused on specifically different areas. Work stream A was all about re-energising and invigorating some of the work that was already going in the industry and putting a bit of muscle behind it to drive it to a conclusion. Work stream B was all about improving our understanding of what the infrastructure picture actually is. What is critical if we're going to maximise the recovery? And when we know what's critical, how do we ensure we manage it appropriately? And then work stream C was tasked with, if those 2 elements are not enough, what are the more radical solutions that are out there? And if we were to implement them, what could the impact be? So we adopted a framework that looks at infrastructure across its entire life cycle. So picture here, is a very simplified picture, pretty generic, and I recognise there are some differences in certain circumstances. But the idea was to put a suitable framework in place that allowed us to look at the issues across the whole life cycle in the right context. So as time goes by, obviously, infrastructure owners' volumes decline. And when that happens, it changes their revenue streams, it changes the priorities as they look at their overall business. And each of the 4 phases have their own challenges, problems, and issues. So we've structured the work streams to look at this in a sort of focused manner and develop some fit-for-purpose recommendations that are suitable across that whole life cycle. Workstream A really is suitable across all 4 elements because it's all about good commercial behaviours. Workstream B is sort of focused in that middle part because it's there you make critical decisions that actually influence the end game. And then Workstream C, if we were to do something that's quite different, is really focused on the latter part of the life cycle there. And here you can see a little bit more detail on the focus areas and deliverables that we've been working on. In Workstream A, we wanted to provide clarity around these new sector-state powers that were introduced in the 2011 Energy Act around dispute resolution. We wanted a whole review of the current ICOP guidelines and the framework that was currently in place. to understand, are we utilising it to its full potential? If not, why not? What are the gaps and issues with what we've currently got in place? And how do we clarify it and simplify it so people really understand what it's about? And then from that, we then plan to retrain the whole industry to improve compliance with it. In Workstream B, we wanted to identify what are the key infrastructure systems that are either critical or best placed to develop the majority of the resources in our basin. And we also wanted to then take a look at, well, what's the exploration potential in the surrounding areas? Could that size of the prize influence that infrastructure picture? And from those two elements, develop what we've called an infrastructure criticality map that looks across our whole of the UK and understands kind of where the resources are going to potentially come from. There's clearly a lot of noise in the industry around infrastructure and particularly infrastructure access. So we wanted to then get under the skin of what's driving that. And we've just recently conducted a review that looks at the technical and commercial blockers of infrastructure access, and you'll hear more from Nigel on that in a moment. And then we wanted to look at, if we understand or improve our understanding of what is critical, how do we then ensure we manage it very, very well? So DEC are re-looking at the stewardship process to look at how that covers infrastructure. And that's one of the areas that we're focusing on. And the second one is to look at, do we need to introduce a performance feedback mechanism within the industry itself? A little bit like what FPAL did for the supply chain, where we in effect almost rank each other. And the driver for that is to sort of, support the companies that are doing a great job and look for others to basically raise their game. And then in Workstream C, it was tasked with studying other countries, other regions, potentially other industries as well, to look for what best practice, what potential improvements are out there. And then to consider their applicability when you look at the sort of challenges that we've got in industry today and the future challenges that potentially are out there. From that to then evaluate those potential challenges, utilising the model that's being built in Workstream B, and then ultimately from that recommending potential changes, potential structural changes, whether that be how infrastructure is owned, risk models, and potentially even physical changes as well. So that was the plan for Workstream C. So we're making progress in all those key areas. And today, we've got limited time available, so we decided to focus on 3 key areas. So we're going to focus initially, Nigel's going to come up. Nigel's been working with Workstream B, and he's going to take you through the work we've done looking at the technical and commercial blockers that's just recently, a number of you may well have participated in the industry into that input, and he'll lead you through what we've done there and the potential messages that's coming out. And then Una will cover, Una's team leader of Workstream B. She'll take you through the ongoing work that we've been working on, looking at the critical infrastructure, how that's shaping up, what the size of the prize potentially is. And then finally, Mark Hughes, who's leading Workstream C, will take you through the work to date that we've done, looking at, if we were to do a more radical sort of solution, what might that look like? How could that change the picture as we go forward? And as Paul said earlier, this is not final outputs. We're working through a set of deliverables actually to pilot in November. But it's a great opportunity to really raise the awareness, get more people engaged in the work that's going on to date, and improve the understanding of that. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Nigel.